This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek and Pacifica, and we're talking with Harvey Smith, who has been active in the struggle to defend People's Park over many years and has been organizing a legal defense and politically to educate people about the issue of privatization and gentrification, which is part of the struggle at People's Park. Welcome, Harvey.
Thank you, Steve.
So, Harvey, today there were barricades put up, big containers, containers to surround the park. Apparently, this has been in the planning for some time. Police, highway patrol, city workers, the mayor of Berkeley, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, was involved. There are highway patrol people there. Were you expecting this? And you have a legal fight going on to protect the park. Apparently, they wanted to move ahead and destroy the park.
We weren't exactly surprised. We knew about the plans mid-December. We thought it might have come, maybe as early as this last Tuesday, but it came today. And we knew, given the experience of last time, that they would bring a lot of force to bear, and they did that. There were park protectors, in the park, but difference from the last time is there were still students here. And so they, I think, very purposely did this during vacation when most students are not in Berkeley. In a way, it's, we have this anniversary coming up in a couple of days, the 3rd-year anniversary of January 6th. And this is sort of, in a way, a twist on that, because it's about authoritarianism in the sense that UC Berkeley feels they can kind of just do anything. It's a very anti-democratic process, the whole thing of the experience of trying to protect the park that we've gone through. And so, January 6th, the police were attacked. In this case, they, attacked the community at the behest of UC Berkeley.
And the developers, UC Berkeley is a major owner of apartments, of rental property in California.
UC Berkeley is a huge property owner. And the point that we've made from the very beginning is that they have alternative sites to develop. They've enumerated a bunch. There's even some that they haven't enumerated. And so they've given the community a very false choice. They say you can either have student housing or a park, when we very well know, we're all in favor of more student housing. It's absolutely critically needed. But we don't feel we have to choose between housing and a park when they have all these alternative places to build. Now, beginning of the week, we sent out a press release, and we quoted.
Who's the we? Why don't you introduce?
So this was through the People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, and we're the group that got the park on the National Register of Historic Places, and we're a plaintiff in the lawsuit against UC. So we issued the press release. The impetus initially for it was that we got a wonderful support letter, kind of late in the game, but we did get it, from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, arguably the most premier preservation organization in the country, chartered by Congress in 1949. And they stated support for preservation of People's Park, and they also pointed out, like we do, that there are alternative sites that could be developed, and People's Park could be saved. Saved for its historic value, and saved because it's an absolutely critically needed urban green space. That part of Berkeley is going to be heavily developed. It's the densest part of Berkeley now. So the South Campus area of Berkeley is the densest part of Berkeley, and plans are to make it even more dense, both by the university and the city of Berkeley. So every standard for urban green space will be violated by this project. There are international standards with WHO. There's American Planning Association standards, so international, national. There are state of California standards and city of Berkeley standards. And what's going to happen is a bunch of people will be crammed into the space, and there's no open space. And you need that for reasons of health, recreation, and public safety. because in a major earthquake, where are people going to go if they're going to be a bunch of high rises in that neighborhood and not one place where you're not standing under a high rise, waiting for it to perhaps fall on you or parts of it to fall on you. So that's People's Park. So anyway, we put a press release out to highlight the support from the National Trust, but included in the press release was a statement from the former vice chancellor of real estate at UC Berkeley, and he was there until 2016, and he spoke about the fact that when they were planning, and he actually accomplished a number of dormitory and other development projects for UC, People's Park was off the table for them. In fact, they even had plans to improve the park to make it more inviting. Once he left his position, it was actually eliminated. I guess all that kind of planning evaporated, and it seems that Carol Christ, the present chancellor, has been very much wrapped up in this idea of developing People's Park for a long time, even when she was vice chancellor many years ago. So it seems to be a bit of an obsession. It doesn't make any sense, and obviously the vice chancellor of real estate statement points that out from internally, and it doesn't make any sense if you take a long-range view and you look at it in terms of its value as a national historic site.
And the developers have a lot of power. There's full-scale gentrification in Berkeley, San Francisco, New York, many cities, the developers, Los Angeles, have control of the politicians, the Democratic Party. Gavin Newsom appoints the Board of Regents at the University of California, most of whom are millionaires and support privatization.
Yes.
What does that have to do with this development of this park?
Oh, a lot. I mentioned earlier this a parallel with January 6th. So January 6th in Washington, D.C. was basically an anti-democratic move. It was, to deny democracy. This process for us has been very much the same thing. It's been interesting in a sense to watch it unfold. So we have been going through the courts, and it's tough because, as they say, we get the best legal system that money can buy. The University of California has very deep pockets. So they're feeding somewhat at the public trough and at the behest of corporate donors, and so they can try to spend you into the ground, because they've got teams of lawyers and teams of PR people to spin anything. But we persevered. We raised a lot of money, hired lawyers, and it's tough. I mean, at the most we've gotten is a few four-figure donations. So it's been mostly smaller donations that have, and it's been thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars to pursue this lawsuit. So once we prevailed in court, what UC Berkeley did was run to the legislature and get a bill, tailored to their needs. This was an epitome of a backroom deal. There was absolutely no public input. And I've spent time in Sacramento on other issues, and I've seen the legislative process unfold. There was not one hearing. There was no public input. The author of the bill is actually our representative.
Buffy Wicks.
Buffy Wicks, okay. I have only met one person in this district, and I'm pretty well connected, one person only that has ever met the woman. So she's pretty invisible. And we didn't know who she was when she ran, but she was heavily financed by the Democratic Party, and she managed to win the seat. But the fact is, as you're saying, this town at this point is controlled by real estate investors and developers. That's our present city council. The present city council is a far cry from what historically Berkeley has been for the last many decades. This is the town of Ron Dellums, Maudel Sherrick, Gus Newport, Ying Lee, and many other very progressive and outspoken activists and politicians. That's not what we have today. We have one council member that is mildly supportive of the park And that's it. So the mayor is very, very close to UC and is basically doing its bidding. We have a state representative, Buffy Wicks, that is likewise doing the same thing. Nancy Skinner has not really spoken up when she actually knows the difference, I think, in this whole housing thing. She's visited Vienna, Austria, where 60% of the housing is either social or cooperative housing. So she knows the difference, but she has not spoken up. And of course, the governor has rolled over and just accepted wholesale the disinformation from Berkeley. Our group, which is very grassroots, it's over 300 people that have either supported us or endorsed us, and they called us privileged YIMBY neighbors, which couldn't be further from the truth. We're not neighbors. NIMBY, excuse me, privileged NIMBY neighbors, and we're not privileged. We don't live nearby, and we certainly are. So we support the building of student housing, but it must be done in a place that's appropriate. One of the other campuses had a really horrible project that would, like this project will, in a sense, be social experimentation because they're going to cram a bunch of mostly young people in a very densely populated neighborhood and strip away their open space when they should be doubling the open space that exists.
And this is the University of California, which has said that it represents the people of California. It's a public institution. What role does the privatization of the university have in this whole development?
Well, the University of California has been characterized, as a public institution, but it's always gotten some level of private support. But I would say it's kind of become the reverse. It's actually a private institution that gets a small amount of public support. And so, of course, its assets are so-called publicly owned. But the fact is, it doesn't get public support. So when I was a student, it was truly a public institution. I didn't run up a huge student debt. There was no tuition when I was a student. You had a student fee. The last fee that I can recall was $99 a year. So anybody financially could afford it. You had to have some money for housing and food, but that was reasonable at that time. Now students are paying over $14,000 a year in tuition. So it's got to exclude a whole lot of people. And then you add on to that the housing pressures, which, you contrast Berkeley with UCLA. UCLA has done a lot to build out its housing. Berkeley just stopped building it a long time ago. And that's created the crisis. So they justify building on People's Park because there's a crisis, but it's a self-made crisis. Comparing Berkeley to UC Santa Barbara. UC Santa Barbara had a very bad idea for housing. It was going to be a dorm with no windows because a deep pocket donor was going to give $200 million for the dorm, but he wanted to design it. And it was basically, in some corners, laughed at as just ridiculous projects, and others, I've seen in architectural journals where they were highly critical of it. It was basically going to create a jail, for students to live in, a building with no windows. So,
and the Regents, have they been confronted with this, with what's People's Park, and what's their position? The Regents all over California, who've been appointed by Governor Brown and now Governor Newsom, where do they stand?
Well, unfortunately, the Regents have not been supportive. We actually engaged with one Regent because the UC Berkeley Faculty Association invited out here to speak Devarian Baldwin, who wrote a book called In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, where he talks about it, and Berkeley is not in the book, but he certainly talks about Berkeley now after his experience coming here. But he talks about other cities, Chicago, Phoenix, New Haven, and New York City, where the universities are like these corporate monsters that are gobbling up neighborhoods and gentrifying neighborhoods. And that's been our experience here in Berkeley, that the University of California acts like a pro-growth at any cost corporate entity. And we all know that growth right now, you have to question growth. We're talking about People's Park that's rooted in the environmental movement, of the late 60s and early 70s. And we need, to protect the environment, but they don't seem to think that that's important, urban green space. So there's just so many contradictions in what they're doing. But the Regents, they seem oblivious. So whatever I think they're fed by the UC Berkeley administration, they seem to lap it up. I think they might have questioned the project at UC Santa Barbara. I don't know what really derailed that, but whatever the case, they realized that it was a bad idea, and they turned their backs on the project and the $200 million that would have come with it.
Now, the barricades they put up, they spent a lot of money bringing in these containers.
Yeah.
It's unheard of to barricade a development site, a construction site with massive containers. They spent a lot of money on that, and they're already digging up after installing the containers. It seems like using the containers to blockade any kind of protest. If there are protests, people may be hurt or killed. And we have an incident where somebody was already killed at People's Park.
Yeah, back in '69. So one person was killed, one person was permanently blinded, and other people's, were shot and then seriously, wounded. I think it comes down to fear of activism. It was activism, and largely student activism, that tore down the fence in August of 22 now. Yeah. And they spent millions on that, fiasco. And I guess this ridiculous idea of surrounding the park with shipping containers is their latest grand idea, So I spoke to someone that lives right next door to the park today, and she's mortified. She looks out her window while we were talking. She was looking out her window at shipping containers, where she used to look out her window and see a park. And it's a shame, because our group is People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, because it really is a historic district. It's a park surrounded by highly historic buildings. There's a national landmark in the Maybeck Church. There's a Julia Morgan building across from the park. That one of the architectural dynasties, I guess the founding architect of the Radcliffe family, has a building facing the park, and then many other historic buildings. So this monolith is going to pop up with their plans out of People's Park, overshadowing this rich architectural legacy of Berkeley.
And the privatization of parks is going on not just in Berkeley, but around the country. In New York, there's also a privatization effort of a park.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar, and the tactics are a little bit different from ours. But it's called the Elizabeth Street Garden. It's on the Lower East Side, and it's a beautiful little urban sanctuary with a kind of an interesting history. But it's become a public park, and it's on land that used to be school district land that was given to the housing authority. And similar to us, the Elizabeth Street Garden people have pointed out that the housing authority has other sites to build on. They don't have to destroy this park in order to erect more housing. And that's the same as our story.
While this development is going on, there's a struggle of the workers at the university. Graduate students went on a strike for living wages. AFSCME workers, $32.99, are facing contract negotiations. Workers can't live on the wages that they're making at the university, and there's outsourcing and privatization. So what is the role of the unions in regard to this development project?
Well, I've spoken to the union president of one of the unions, Catherine Leibarger, and she's pointed out that they fought also for housing. What affects students also affects the lower tier workers at Cal. So in many cases, they're traveling miles and miles, to get to work because they can't afford housing in the East Bay. Or sometimes they'll come here, sleep in a car, and then drive home because they have to go so far. So housing is also an issue for the workers. And they understand, or at least I know Catherine understands this issue at People's Park, and the contradictions that we're facing in the community are very similar to some of the contradictions that the workers at UC are also facing.
It seems like they've spent millions of dollars on union-busting attorneys to attack the unions. The UAW 2865 members have faced legal assaults. They're ignoring their contract, going out to finding ways of avoiding paying them what they negotiated. It seems like, the regents and management have a union-busting corporate agenda.
Well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think it's it's corporate growth at any cost, and that's where they're coming from. And it's always a struggle, but it's definitely you don't feel like you're dealing with a public institution. You're dealing more with a corporate entity, I think, and we've seen that, and I'm sure the union workers see the same thing. We heard that the Cal's food service workers were required to work all night last night to serve the hundreds of police officers that were in town to carry out this action against the community. They've never had to do that, serve as many people, and of course work overnight. But that's what's happened, and obviously because of they're doing this during the break when students are here, they're able to tap those resources. But the university has leaned on this community in many different ways. We have a lot of questions because of the very too close relationship between the mayor and the chancellor, and the support that he gets from most of the council. Some really funny things has happened. The permits to put these containers down, that happened, I think on Tuesday, when actually the permits office was closed. So how were they able to issue a permit when the office is closed? And the fact that the streets have been commandeered by the police. And I haven't driven around every street, but whether it be the Berkeley police or the highway patrol or other police agencies that have come in, the fact is this is not a national emergency. Why is the university and the city taking over our streets and causing all this havoc for the residents of Berkeley?
I guess their priority is to get this development going.
Yeah, I mean it's development at any cost.